Our next topic is typical development in preschool, and that's what this PowerPoint is going to be about. And let's get going. So, in preschool, which is ages 3 to 5, there's still a wide range of typical in normal. It's narrowing down a bit. We have a broader idea of what a typical 4-year-old does, but still, some 4-year-olds do certain things and some 4-year-olds don't. So we still have a fairly wide range of normal. Just as in early intervention, we're going to use quality to determine whether a child is actually in the normal range when we're at the very low end of that typical range. So it is typical, for example, for a child who just turned 3 to be able to get all their clothes off, and somewhere in the 3s they're looking at putting their clothing back on again. If we have a child who's at the end of their 3s and they're still not getting everything off by themselves and they're really not thinking about getting things on, we want to take a look at the quality of that and the practice that they've had. Is somebody doing it for them all the time, or have they had a chance to practice? Is the child interested in dressing, or are they really not interested in that and they just want to get going? And maybe they don't even like wearing clothes. Maybe there's a sensory issue and they have tactile defensiveness, touch sensitivity, so they're not going to be dressing. So we're going to kind of look at all the other factors when a child is at the low end of that range. And we're going to look at that overall developmental arc. A child started here and they're headed here. Where are they in their path? Where are they in that developmental sequence? And maybe they started out a little premature, and so they were behind a little bit. But as you go forward, they're catching up and catching up and catching up, and maybe we're not so worried. Or maybe they've been 6 months behind, and now they're 8 months behind, and now they're 12 months behind, and now it's really getting to be a problem in preschool. So we want to look at that overall developmental arc and see how they're doing and sort of put it in context to help us understand whether or not we're going to be worried about a child's development. So in preschool, development is characterized by a lot of fine motor growth. Our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds are spending a lot of time figuring out small things. They're figuring out how to put beads together, how to do buttons. They're figuring out how to write and hold a writing utensil, how to paint. They're figuring out how to do all sorts of very small, complicated things. They're also really working a lot on their self-help and ADL and adaptive things. They are, in the preschool years, they learn how to get themselves dressed and do all of their fasteners. They learn, in terms of adaptive, they learn about emotional control. They don't just cry when they're upset. Sometimes they'll yell when they're upset, or they will pout when they're upset, or they'll have a variety of different responses. So they're learning to control their emotions to some degree, and they're learning how to be in spaces with other children. They're learning how to cooperate, how to play with other kids. They're learning how to communicate with other children and adults. So they're really learning all about being in an environment with other peers, much more so than in early intervention. So I want to talk a minute about the concept of overflow in motor development. So overflow is when a child is working really, really hard at something and you see motions, motor echoes, essentially, in other parts of the body. So for example, when you give a child, a young child, say a 2-year-old who hasn't seen scissors before, and you give them scissors and they're just learning how to do it, they're working really hard at opening and closing scissors, you might see their mouth open and close with their hand. You might see the other hand mimic what the scissor hand is doing, opening and closing. That's when they're working really hard. You might see a child when they're trying to figure out how to button their clothing, their tongue is sticking out and they're biting their tongue. Some children, their eyes might cross when they're working really hard at something. So overflow tells us it's a signal of effort. It's a symptom of effort. So when is it a problem and when isn't it a problem? If you have a child who is 2 years old and just introduced to scissors, the example I gave a little bit ago, and they have a lot of overflow, that's really not a concern. That shows that the child is working at it and learning, and that's appropriate. If, however, I'm going to give a 5-year-old a pair of scissors, and they've been working with scissors since they were 2, And I still see overflow. I still see all that effort going on in a 5-year-old who has had scissors introduced to him over the past 2 years, then I'm going to be concerned. So you want to see, is this a new task? Is it something that should be that effortful? And that's when you decide whether or not overflow is a problem. Preschool readiness is what the preschool teachers and the preschool placement needs in order to have a child be successful there. They need to have a certain level of development in order to be successful in a typical preschool. One of the things most preschools are looking for is independence with toileting. Some assistance is provided in preschool if someone has trouble with getting their jeans buttoned again, or they have trouble with a difficult zipper, or they have trouble with a particularly difficult piece of clothing. Then you will see preschools, especially with young preschoolers with 3-year-olds, helping them with like overall clasps. Getting the clasp of an overalls to go together can be tricky for some kids. And some jeans have pretty difficult buttons or snaps. So you'll see people helping with that, but really not a lot. They need to be following directions in a group, and they certainly need to be following directions individually, but they need to be able to follow a group direction. Okay, everybody, it's time for snack. Let's all go sit down at the table. They have to be able to follow that. Or it's circle time, everybody find a color to sit on. So they need to be able to follow that sort of direction. They certainly have to be able to eat their own snack by themselves and, for the most part, open most food containers. Now, teachers will help younger children opening a milk carton or something like that. But by the time a kid's in preschool, they should be able to take the straw off a juice box and poke it into the little spot and be independent with drinking out of that. They should be able to pull open a bag of crackers or, whatever they're given with some minimal assistance. They should understand and be able to engage in cooperative play in addition to parallel play by this age. So they should be able to be playing with their peers, not just near their peers. And they should be able to understand classroom rules. So in our classroom, our hands are not for hitting, is a classroom rule that you might hear in a preschool. And a child in preschool should be able to understand that. They may indeed need reminders, but they should be able to understand that. In terms of their gross motor skills, they're going to be improving their equilibrium and balance in this age. They're going to be climbing on large structures indoors and outdoors and working on their balance, their weight shifts. They're going to be working on slides, on overhead climbing things. So they really are working hard on their strength and endurance, and they're challenging themselves. Kids at preschool want to get better at motor skills. They have the basics, but they want to learn to ride a bike. They want to learn to climb up the slide in addition to slide down. They want to be able to get to the top of the climber, all that stuff. With all that practice in gross motor skills, they're working on their bilateral coordination. So they're working on their ability to pump a swing. They're working on their ability to use 2 hands in that climbing that we just talked about. They're also working on bilateral coordination with smaller things like with buttons and zippers and things like that. Their complexity of skills and quality of movement is going to be improving in this preschool time, so that they're going from a basic run to now a really well-coordinated run where they're catching air at every run and their arms are pumping. Again, with the pumping on the swing, they're going to be adding things like galloping and skipping and jumping skills, jumping down from higher heights. And they're going to be getting better at these things so that they fall less often and they're just more skilled at these things. So in preschool, children are going to be able to stand on one foot. They're going to be able to hop like a bunny. They're going to be able to ride a tricycle by 3. By 5, they're probably going to be able to ride without training wheels. So in between 3 and 5, they go from a tricycle to a bicycle without training wheels. Around 5. Some kids indeed learn a bike without training wheels at 4. It's rare, and some kids can take up to 7 or 8 to learn. But the average is by 5-ish. They can bounce a ball and throw overhand. and they're galloping. They're not quite yet skipping, although a few kids may be talented enough to be able to skip. By 4, they can go down the stairs 1 foot on each step reciprocally, as opposed to marking time, which is 2 feet on each step. So before 4, they could go up reciprocally, but they couldn't come down that way. And now they're going to learn how to come down that way. They can repeatedly hop across the room, and they can catch a ball in their hands like a tennis ball, not trapping it with their body, but just in their hands. In terms of the fine motor sequence, again, they're refining. Movement is coming more and more to the thumb side of the hand. Bilateral skills, like we talked about with the gross motor, is also coming into the fine motor skills with fasteners, beads, things like that. The sequence with fine motor skills, first a child can trace a shape. That means the shape is there. You put a clear or a piece of tracing paper over it, or just nothing, or just the shape is there, and they can go on top of it. Imitating means you do it and they watch you do it, and then they can do it. Copy means you show them the shape and they can make it next to it. They didn't watch you make it. And create means I ask the child to make a line, and they know they can make a line. So that's the sequence. It goes trace, imitate, copy, create. And the sequence for cutting goes from snipping. So first kids learn how to close scissors. It takes them a little while to learn how to open scissors, and that's when you see that mouth opening and closing when kids are first learning how to open scissors. Closing scissors, once you place the scissors on a child's hand, closing is easy. They just essentially make a fist. And kids indeed learn that pretty quickly. But learning how to open the scissors without dropping them takes a while, because you have to open the hand but still keep it curved and still keep the thumb into the thumb hole. It also takes kids a little while to learn how to put the scissors on their hand correctly. So first they can snip, so they get the closing, and then they can fringe, which means they can snip, 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 snip repeatedly along the edge. So they have to open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close. So that takes a little while. Then the next skill that they get is to be able to cut across a paper. So to be able to open, close in a line. Open, close, open, close, open, close, all the way until they get to the other side of the paper. They're not cutting on a particular line or not. They're cutting more in a row, right? So instead of the snipping, which is side to side, they're pushing after each cut. That push, push, push allows them to get across the paper. Then after they can do that, then they can do that same cutting across, but they can follow a line. They'll follow a wide line, and then a narrower line, and then a narrower line. Once they can follow a fairly narrow line, they learn how to cut on a curve. And then corners. Corners are harder than curves to cut. If you try it yourself, you'll see that to cut a curve, you kind of have to angle your hand and follow. But to cut corners, you actually have to open the scissors, turn the paper, reposition, and then cut. So it is harder. It takes more steps. And then the last thing they learn is how to cut shapes. And they'll start with big shapes and then smaller and smaller and smaller shapes. By the time a child is 5, they can cut things out pretty close to the line, and they can cut out complicated shapes. Generally, the first time a child is given scissors is around 3. So between 3 and 5, they learn to go from snipping all the way to cutting out complex shapes. This is a sequence within a sequence, if you will. So trace is the first one, and then imitate, and then copy, and then create, right? We had that on the previous slide. So within tracing, there's tracing a line, tracing curves, tracing corners, tracing large shapes and smaller shapes. Within imitating, you first can imitate a single line, then you can imitate curves, blah, blah, blah. So the idea is to understand that a child can trace, and you don't go from tracing right to imitating, right? You have to make sure that they can trace all those more complicated things before they're going to be imitating all those things. And of course, there's overlap. Some children are going to move ahead and be tracing just on a line and just curves and then get ready to imitate the line. But you should know that there's a sequence within that sequence. And the same with scissors. There's snipping, and a child can maybe snip once or twice, and then they can snip on a whole side, and then they can snip all around the whole paper, reorienting it each time. and then you're going to move to cutting across. Maybe they can cut across a short paper and then wider and then wider. So again, there's a sequence within a sequence. So by 3, a child is going to be able to string 1/2-inch beads. They're going to be able to snip with scissors. They're going to be able to copy a vertical, horizontal line, a circle, and a cross. By 4, they're going to be able to copy a square and a triangle and probably the first letter of their name. By 5, as I said before, they're going to cut out complex shapes. And by 5, they're also going to be able to copy some letters and words. And by 5, they might even be able to make their name without copying. They might be able to just create their name, or they can certainly copy their name by then. By 5, a child can use a ruler, a hammer, a stapler, all different kinds of tools. Drawing at 3 involves a face with arms and legs. They don't do a body until they're older, sometimes not even until after 5. Some 5-year-olds are still not doing a body. In terms of blocks, by 3 they can make a 4-block train, and by 3 they can also stack about 10 blocks. And by 5 they can do diadokinesis. So if you put your left hand palm down on the table and your right hand palm up on the table, and then you switch so that the left hand goes palm up and the right hand goes palm down, but at the same time you go 1, 2, 3, switch, and 1, 2, 3, switch. You can hear that I'm doing it on the table with you. So you switch palm up to palm down at the same time with both hands, but one hand is going palm down to palm up while the other hand is going palm up to palm down. That's diadokinesis. And by 5, a child can coordinate the 2 sides of their body in a way to be able to do that. Cognitively, in preschool, the big thing that students are working on in this age range is creative and imaginative play. Pretend play is huge in the preschool years. They are working on imitating adults around them. They are working on trying out different imaginative scenarios, some realistic, some completely fanciful, but they are working on stretching their imaginations, on making things up, on making a spoon into a microphone. Right there, they're taking objects and giving them different meaning in their imagination. Creative, imaginative play is huge. Some of it is very grounded in reality. I'm a firefighter. I'm wearing a child-sized firefighter hat, and I have a special firefighter coat, and I'm going to go put out the fires. And the child's going to run around the room making siren noises and shushing at people to put out their fires. So that's very based in reality. Or they're going to be on planet Tucumcari, and they're going to be flying around without any wires because everybody on Tucumcari can fly. And here's how I speak. I have a different language. So some is based in reality and some is completely fanciful. This creative, imaginative play is critical in the preschool years. A child that isn't doing imaginative pretend play in the preschool years, we have serious concerns about their skills. So it's a very important part of their cognitive development at this age. A little more concretely, they can complete an 8 to 15 piece puzzle. Usually that is a puzzle with a frame around it. So puzzles come in difficulty levels. The easiest puzzle is what we call a shape sorter. So that's, I don't know if you're familiar with the little yellow can with the blue lid, and there's a circle, square, and a triangle hole at the top, and the child has to put the right one in. That's a very simple puzzle, and that is generally younger than preschool. They can do that. And then somewhere in the 2s, they can do an inset puzzle, which means there's a puzzle and there are different shapes cut out of it, and each puzzle piece fits into one of those spots. Usually they have little knobs on top so that you can hang on to the piece and pull it out and put it in. So those puzzles with the little knobs on them, and you can look around the lab, we have a few of those, are called inset puzzles, when it's one piece that gets plunked in the middle of a background and there's just a little hole for that piece. Then there are interlocking puzzles, which is what I'm talking about here, that go in a frame. They're usually cardboard, and there's a frame around them, and often there's dents on the surface so you can match the shape to what the shape on the surface is. Sometimes it's actually the entire puzzle is printed on the bottom, and all the student has to do is match where it goes, which is obviously easier than if the bottom has shapes delineated with little lines, but not what goes on it. And then even harder would be if it was a flat surface with a frame around it and no hints whatsoever as to where the pieces go. So those also come in levels, and you have to be cognizant of where the child is at in that hierarchy. In preschool, children are going to be speaking in short sentences, and they can tell a simple story. Obviously, a 3-year-old is going to use shorter sentences. A 5-year-old is going to use much more complex stories. Sentences and tell more complex stories. So between 3 and 5, that changes a lot. A 3-year-old can do a beginning, middle, end, very short story. I went to the store with mommy. She got me a cookie, and then we came home. A 5-year-old is going to be able to tell you much, much more complicated story about a vacation that they went on, what they did, who they saw, much more in depth. Preschoolers understand and ask why. They ask why a lot because they really want to know how the world works. It can be annoying sometimes when they're constantly asking why, especially 3-year-olds will say why. And sometimes you just have to stop the game because, there's no more whys to be had. But they understand what they're asking, and they know that it's a little annoying, but they sort of don't care because they really want to know why. They are beginning to understand one-to-one correspondence, and that's as opposed to rote counting. So rote counting is, I can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 without any objects in front of me at all. I just know the order of those words, right? That's rote counting. One-to-one correspondence means I pick up a block and I put it down and I say 1. I pick up another block, I put it down, I say 2. I pick up another block, I put it down, I say 3. That's one-to-one correspondence. So that you really have a concept of numbers. You understand very clearly that when there's more than one block sitting there, that's a different thing than when there's one block sitting there. So you're understanding the concepts of numbers. Children in the preschool years can match colors, and they know the color words, and by 5 they can tell you what those are. Some younger children can tell you their color words, but not all. So usually it starts out where a child can point to a color. So if you give them 2 colors and you say which one is the blue one, they can point to the blue one. And they can match. So you say, here, put the blue with the blue, and they can put the blue one on the blue one and the red one on the red one. And they might even know the color words but not use them correctly. By the time a child is 5, he can say, that's green, that's blue, that's purple, that's red, that's orange, and they know all of their colors. In preschool, they know what shapes are. They can get beyond circle, square, triangle, and they know star and more complicated shapes than that. Some of them know octagon, hexagon, and things like that. They know their basic body parts, and they can name them. So we've gotten past head, shoulders, and knees and toes. They know their cheeks. They know their thigh. They know most of their body parts. So the sequence for shapes and colors goes like this. First, they can match. Then they can point to the correct one if given 2. Then after that, they can point to the correct one given a whole bunch of them. So if you give them 10 shapes or 10 colors, they get the red one. And then they can label, and you say, what's that? And they can tell you that's red or that's a circle. The sequence for dressing, by 3, so in the 2s, they're learning how to take things off. 1-year-olds can start to assist with dressing and undressing. They'll pull an arm out, they'll pop it off their head, they'll present an arm or a leg to put something on. And in the 2s, they're starting to get undressed. Some 2-year-olds are pretty good at getting naked for their bath, but certainly by the end of the 2s and the beginning of the 3s, they can get everything off. They can get undressed for their bath. By the time a child gets to 4, so in the 3s, they can get clothes back on. And as they get into the 4s, and by the end of the 4s, they're getting things on the right way around, right side out. They are getting inside, outside, and front, back, and all of that stuff. So they're really getting pretty skilled with getting everything on, and they can do some of the fasteners. By 5, they should be able to do all their fasteners, including tying shoes. So they should be able to buckle, button, zipper, do tie their shoes, do all that stuff. Social and adaptive development. In preschool, they are moving away from just seeking comfort and attachment from their parents or their adult significant others. Now they're seeking attachment from their peers as well. So they want to have a best friend. They start to identify what a friend is. And they say, you know, Susie is my friend. So they're starting to attach to peers. They're getting much better at regulating their emotions, and they're starting to develop guilt. So they feel badly for having done something that they shouldn't have done, or not doing something that they should have done. So a 4-year-old, if everybody is sitting and eating snack together and a 4-year-old takes another kid's cookie, if you stop and say, Sally, you took Tommy's cookie, that wasn't nice, Sally's going to go, I'm sorry, I feel badly. She's going to feel guilty about that. Preschoolers can certainly be negative and oppositional and mischievous and humorous and all the rest of it. They have personalities that can be fantastic to watch develop. They can give you a hard time. They certainly can, because now they have enough cognitive development and enough verbal skills to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't like you. What you did was bad. I didn't like it. They are humor at 3 to 5 is pretty funny, and they try to trick you. They think it's really great to like take some of the gum of yours and then go and hide somewhere and giggle so that you find them. So they like to be mischievous. Their idea of morality is really based on rewards and punishments, not what the rules are. So they're really not internalizing rules. They're really working off of, what am I going to get rewarded for? What am I going to get punished for? So if I stole Susie's cookie, I'm going to get in trouble. And that's how their morality goes. And if I pay attention and I follow the directions, the teacher's going to like me, and I'm going to get a pat on the head or a hug. So they're really working off of that rewards and punishment framework for their morality. In terms of their adaptive skills, at this age, they definitely should be able to settle themselves to sleep by themselves. Whether they are still sucking their thumb at night, that's fine. Sometimes at night, some kids will still suck their thumb in the preschool years. That's totally fine. They might have a lovey that they sleep with, a teddy bear, whatever, a blanket. But they're able to get themselves to sleep by themselves. They don't need an adult to pat their back the whole time and stay with them while they settle to sleep. They're also able to manage disputes with peers with less adult intervention. So when 2 children are arguing over a toy, they start to be able to manage that dispute. If somebody takes something from someone else, which happens, or somebody knocks over somebody's construction, which happens, the adults can hang back a little bit and see if the kids can work that out themselves in preschool. With 2-year-olds, you're not going to let them do that because they can't manage that emotional dispute. They're just going to end up crying or hitting each other. But by 3, they know how to, by 3s and 4s in preschool, they're not going to be just hitting each other or just crying. They're going to actually be using their words to try to manage the dispute. Again, they can cope with difficult situations better. They have a lot more social emotional tools at their disposal. So if they're sad, they might go sit by themselves and hold their teddy bear for a bit and get themselves in a better situation to play with others. If they are overwhelmed and they don't want to be with the other students right now, they know how to separate themselves. They know how to rejoin. They do a pretty good job with that. And they know who their friends are. They know who they want to play with. In terms of behavior and emotion, preschoolers learn via modeling. All children learn via modeling. And the way it works is you model what you want them to do, you give them instructions, you give them opportunities for rehearsal, and then you give them feedback about how they did. This is the sequence for behavior shaping and behavior modeling. It is how all learning happens, really. So let's try an example here. How does a child learn how? Let's go back to cutting with scissors, right? The adult is going to hold the scissors and say, look, this is cutting. When I open these and I close them on the paper, look at that, it cut. And the child gets very excited because when you first learn how to cut, it's kind of magic. So the adult is going to show them how to do it. And then the adult is going to put it on the child's hand and give them instructions and say, here's how it goes on your hand. Now hold it open. I'm going to have you bring it up close to the paper. Okay, now close your hand, make a fist. And the child is going to close their hand and they're indeed going to snip. And then the teacher or the adult is going to give them a chance to practice, rehearsal time. Say, okay, try it, you try it. And the child's going to try it, and then the adult is going to give them feedback about that. This also can work with social emotional behaviors, not just motor behaviors. So let's take the example of I'm sorry when you hurt somebody. So what happens when a child hurts another child? Well, we want that child to understand that that's not a good thing to do. Now, they're not going to get that right away, and they might not actually be sorry, but this is one of those instances of fake it till you make it, right? So we teach the child to say they're sorry, and we teach them that when they do something that hurts another child, this is what we do. And then as they develop, they start to understand and they start to actually become sorry. So, but we teach them before they kind of quite understand it yet. So in preschool, kids, we have to kind of teach them still. So a child knocks down another child, and the child who got knocked down cries and is upset. The teacher goes to the two children and looks at the child that's down on the floor and models and says, oh, are you okay? I'm so sorry you fell down. Here, come, let me give you a hug, right? So they're modeling what you do. Then they're going to tell the child, the adult's going to tell the child, please tell Susie that you're sorry that you knocked her down. Look, she's crying. She's not happy. And then the child tries it and says, I'm sorry for knocking you down. And then you say, good. So if you knock a child down, you have to apologize, right? Because you didn't mean to hurt Susie. So we're going to apologize and say, we're sorry. And you're going to give them that feedback. So it works with motor skills. And it's how we learn motor skills. It's how we learn behaviors. It's how we learn. So modeling happens because children watch adults intently. It's like with babies, they just stare all the time trying to figure out the adult world. We want to try to model in context. The previous example I gave you of the child who fell down, that's in the context of something that happened, right? I'm not going to, out of the blue, say, hey, did you know, by the way, that when you mistakenly or not mistakenly knock somebody over, this is what you should do? It's not going to mean anything, right? But in the moment when it happens, it's going to have meaning. You see the child on the ground crying. The other person knows they just knocked her down because they can feel it in their body still. And it's right now. It's happening. And that makes a lot more sense. So we want to repeat these things when they happen in context as often as we need to get the point across. And the rehearsal has to happen right away to solidify the learning. So when Tommy knocks Susie down, or when Susie knocks Tommy down, whatever way you want to look at it, Susie needs to right away be shown how to apologize and given that rehearsal opportunity. Now tell Tommy that you're sorry that you knocked him down. And then Tommy has to say, I'm really sorry. Susie has to say, I'm really sorry I knocked you down, Tommy. So we want them to rehearse as soon as possible because that reinforces the learning. During the instruction phase of this, you want to make sure that the learner is attending to what you are instructing them. So if Susie knocks down Tommy and you model, first you model and you say, oh, are you okay, Tommy? I'm so sorry you got knocked down. Are you going to be all right? Here, let me give you a hug. You model. If the learner isn't paying attention, it doesn't help. They're not going to learn. So when you say, please tell Tommy that you're sorry that you knocked him down, if they're not paying attention, it won't work. So it's really critical that the learner is attending to what you're modeling and the instructions that you're giving. The instructions have to be very specific. Give Tommy a hug and tell him that you're sorry, right? It's very, very specific. The child has to know exactly what's expected out of them, and it has to be obviously at their level. And again, repeat as often as needed until the child gets it, and that rehearsal time has to be right away. So the teacher has to see the behavior, right? So you can't correct behaviors unless you see them. So in the knocking down example, Susie knocks Tommy down. The teacher sees this, and the teacher needs to see Susie say, "I'm sorry," and give Tommy a hug. You can't walk away. You can't just say, "Okay, go ahead and tell Tommy that you're sorry," and then the teacher walks away. The teacher has to stick around, or the adult has to stick around and watch Susie say, "I'm sorry, Tommy, here is a hug," and hug him. So you have to be able to watch that so that you can correct and reinforce the behavior. So if Susie, instead of saying, "I'm sorry," and hugging Tommy, says, "I don't care," and walks away, you have to be able to bring the child back and say, "Nope, Susie, that's not what you're supposed to do. When you knock somebody down, what you need to do is this," and do the instructions again, and then watch that she actually does the "I'm sorry, Tommy," and gives him a hug. So you can't give the instruction unless you're there to see it, and you have to see the behavior happen, and you have to the child practice it until they get it right. So the last part here is begin with simple behaviors and add complexity when you've mastered the easy part. So you want to not give the child something very complicated, a complicated behavior. So the one I gave you the example of is a pretty simple one, "I'm sorry," and you give the child a hug. But there are more complicated behaviors that we sometimes have to instruct children on. So we don't want to get too complicated unless the child is ready for that.